Redditors who remarried an ex-spouse. Why did you divorce and how did you get back together? My great aunt and uncle did this. He was still suffering from the trauma of his World War II service with the Marines in the Pacific when she had a stillborn child and was told she'd never have kids. And things just imploded. They got divorced. My aunt traveled to Asia and the Middle East for like 9 months. While for him it was more or less the wake up call that he was still ducked up from seeing his buddies get blown up. She came back. And he had completely changed. And they completely reconnected. Keep in mind, this was the 50s, so the thought of a 30-something Marine vet going to therapy and being in touch with his PTSD triggers, and it was pretty ducking life altering. Her next planned trip was Europe and she asked if he wanted to come along and his response was, I figured they'd send me there to fight Hitler. But I guess this works too. They called my grandma from Gdansk maybe 2 months later to let them know they had gotten remarried in the church my great grandparents had gotten married in. And were together until Aunt Betty died about 3 years ago. Uncle Frank died a year after her, and used to tell us all the time that he missed his girlfriend. Not me, but this guy who works in one of our rural offices has married and divorced the same woman literally 6 times. I'm not sure what their logic is, but whatever. Had a friend once who married her high school sweetheart, then divorced on their 5-year anniversary just so they could get married again. I lived with a woman for a couple years. Broke up badly. She called me decades later and said I was her best boyfriend ever and wanted to know if I wanted to try again. It lasted a week. Even though it didn't work out, we smoothed things over and still have a friendship. I don't regret any of it. My parents got pregnant in their senior year of high school and married over the summer on my mom's 18th birthday because she wouldn't ask her parents to sign the marriage certificate. My brother was born a few months later and they stuck it out for a year before divorcing. Then my dad got drafted to Vietnam and when he came home 19 months later went straight to my mom to see my brother. They remarried, trying to do the right thing. All they got out of that marriage was me. They divorced a few years later before my first birthday. They've always remained civil, even friendly, but I have no idea how they stayed married as long as they did. They're very different, non-compatible personalities. This thread needs a happy story. My first husband and I married pretty young after college. We were generally happy, but it seemed like our lives were moving in different directions, geographically and metaphysically. We split up. We dated other people, went through the motions, mechanically, loved other people, sure, but without the sense of destiny and certainty we had with one another. Finally, over a decade after breaking it off, we got back together and have never been happier. Now we have the life experience to know that what we have is irreplaceably special. The stupid small things that seemed problematic back then, we now know to be non-issues. We've seen so many other couples fight and struggle for what we have naturally. We're so lucky. Edit. Thanks, everyone, for your kind words, and you poem for your sprog for your lovely verses. My mom and dad married out of high school. When they were 26 they got divorced. They divorced because of the stress of 3 kids. My dad was in the Air Force and was deployed all the time. And while neither parent has confirmed it, but based on some jokes I believe my dad was also unfaithful and in general he was just very immature. My mom left him because in her words she had 3 kids to take care of, grad school to get through, and didn't have time for his bullet. They both went on to have different relationships and lives. They barely saw each other unless it was to trade us kids off. Then around the time my sister and I started playing sports my dad started to come around more to watch us. We lived about 6 hours away and mom let him stay at the house when needed. He went from sleeping on the couch to her bedroom within a football season. They got married again the next summer after 6-7 years apart. Been together ever since and practically do everything together. Years ago I saw the country singer-songwriter Billy Joe Shaver introducing a song. He said, "This one I wrote for my wife. I love that woman so much I married her 3 times. He chuckled and said, "Of course I divorced her a couple of times too." I dated my girlfriend for about 5 years before we split up. We had been living together but her anxiety and my depression led to a pretty terrible situation. After being apart for 1-2 years, we had both worked on our mental health and gotten good jobs. We both realized that we liked just talking to each other more than being with anyone else. We got married in 2017 and are still going strong. I was contracting a couple years ago and my headhunter would take me for lunch every couple months. The last lunch we had together before he went into negotiations for my next contract, he was very sad and depressed. I asked him what was the matter, and he basically just broke down and told me that he was getting a divorce because she was cheating. Being of an advanced age, I had many friends get divorced around that time, so I kinda knew the routine. I talked with him and told him how dudes with good jobs are pretty in demand post 35. He thanked me for listening and really went to bat for me in negotiations and got me the max salary for the contract. I told this story a bunch as an example of being nice to everyone. You never know what could happen. However, I kinda stopped telling this story because my wife and I were out at the movies a year or so later. We see my recruiter and start talking and catching up. Then this woman walks up to him and he introduces her as his wife. I say, "Oh hey, congrats. I'm glad you met someone." He looks at me a little panicked and starts awkwardly explaining that he remarried the same woman. I haven't talked to him since, so I don't know the full story. I just hope he's happy. He was a nice dude. This will be a sweeter answer than expected. Not me, but a client of mine was working to get citizenship. They had been married back in their home country and had immigrated to the US. Because they weren't sure if their country's marriage was legally recognized in the US, they decided to get divorced and then remarried in the US. I see mostly tales of remarital woe here. I'll offer you a positive rebuttal. My mom and dad split when I was 5 and my sister was 7. They were young with 2 kids and incredibly broke. I don't know the full story or all the details, but I'm sure those things all just caught up to them in the end. It was a really rough divorce, especially for us kids. They were separated for 3 years or so, lived in separate apartments etc. My mom started seeing a new guy, although we never saw my dad with anyone. I'm sure he was seeing people too. Some years passed, their rebounds came and went. They both got stable jobs and started seeing each other more. Showing up at Christmas together, attending soccer games together. When I was 9 or so they decided to rent a house. 1 year later they found out they were pregnant with my little sister. They got remarried about a year after my little sister was born. That was 21 years ago. They are sincerely one of the happiest couples I've ever been around. You never would have thunk it 25 years or so ago. Sometimes space and refocus is actually all you need. Happy Christmas. Why are half the responses here copies of 1-year-old posts from accounts with no other activity? Did I accidentally step into an industrial karma farm? Are unresolved parental issues the thing that will finally make the computers turn against their human overlords? I have 2 friends whose parents have done this, or at least divorced and got back together even though they didn't remarry. In both cases their moms filed for divorce and made the decision to return when their ex-husband's health was failing. One dad sadly passed away and the other dad is in remission, still with his wife, but doesn't realize the Catholic Church has her listed as a widow. I find some similarities in the 2 families. Both moms show narcissistic tendencies with favoritism and martyrdom. My husband just reminded me of friends of ours that divorced after raising kids and then recently got back together after divorcing 10 years ago. Raising their kids was super stressful for her because he woke up for work at 2 AM and so after 6 PM she had to keep 4 kids quiet. His chronic lack of sleep meant he was super particular about the tidiness of the house, and by time they got the twins out of the house they had been ready to split for years. 10 years, grandkids, and wisdom later they decided they really did still like each other and that the situation they were in just wasn't ideal. If I have to read one more response, that is my parents. My friend, I'm gonna get tilted up. We need the gritty deets from the people actually doing it. Your outside view could very well be wrong. Your mom and dad could have got remarried not because your dad is a kind and thoughtful soul, but in fact because he has a massive sklong. Please leave this discussion to the first-hand accounts please and thank you. My sister did this. They divorced because he was controlling. Not physically abusive as far as I'm aware. After the divorce he went into counseling and got his it together. They later remarried 1 or 2 years later. I loved her. She wanted to take the other half of my money through another divorce. Not at all the same thing, but my wife and I met in middle school. Lost our virginities to each other at 14. Dated for a year. Broke up. Did the whole Facebook thing where you say we should totally catch up for a coffee one time and never did. Sort of said that for years. One time we actually did meet up though on a whim. We each had different partners at the time. The attraction was immediate. Been married 8 years. Have 3 kids. Pretty great overall. My grandparents did this when I was like 7. They divorced so my grandpa could get with his Filipino girlfriend, which was an obvious scam. Then when he realized it was a bad idea and got remarried. We never got married, but were together for 7 years. We broke up because I was planning to move out of the country after graduating. Was an older student. I was 29 at that point. We were best friends and stayed best friends throughout it, though. But circumstances made it impossible for me to see the plans through, and I went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and landed in the psych ward, like you do. He drove me to intake, stayed during my admitting, and came to see me every single day. He's everything good in this world. Needless to say, we got back together 2 years ago and we're in it to win it. True love isn't what movies and it make it out to be. True love is bringing someone socks that actually fit their ridiculously tiny feet when they are trapped in the psych ward. I left my ex when he started doing drugs. I got full custody. It was so bad. He got sober after losing his kids. I got sick. Years later I was so sick I couldn't deal and he let me move in with him. Then I bought a house and he moved in with me. He's 49 and keeps getting hotter and hotter. No grey hair, sexy dad bod. Dating in your 40s as a female success for your information. Most men are questionable at this point. He's super in love with me and a great provider and dad. I've been fighting it but it's been slowly becoming a thing. I know a lot of people that were together at a young age, split up and 10 years later got back together and married etc. I actually have a really heartfelt story about my aunt and uncle. They originally were high school sweethearts, married young, had 2 kids, were together for 25 years. My uncle had a really bad drinking problem, and they were constantly unhappy, so my aunt filed for divorce. My uncle's drinking got worse then, and he basically drank himself to death. He ended up going to the hospital and was really sick. They detoxed him for 2 weeks and he never touched a bottle of alcohol again. He was sober for 2 years, and had a stroke. It really ducked him up and he hasn't fully recovered from it. This caused my aunt and uncle to get back together though. After his stroke she would visit him every day in the hospital, and eventually had him come back home so she could make sure he was taken care of and safe. He could barely walk, and his swallowing was affected, so there was a high choking risk. He eventually recovered to the point he could take care of himself, but they are still living together and sleep in the same bed again, although they haven't remarried. Not me, but my friend did. They got a divorce when their baby was under a year old. They divorced because my friend lost her job and couldn't find another that paid enough to cover transportation, childcare, and even groceries. They were struggling, but because they didn't meet certain poverty lines they were denied government assistance. When they divorced she said she was a single mother and they did get some assistance. They married again after her child went to school. My great-grandmother divorced and remarried my great-grandfather 3 times. As far as numbers 2 and 3 go I'm not certain, although he definitely cheated on her on a number of occasions. So there you go. But I know number 1 because my great-grandma wouldn't go down on him like the French girls did. He was in France during World War I. So there you go. They were divorced when he finally croaked, but they were working on getting married again. No doubt they probably would have been doing that song and dance forever. As an added curiosity, during that final divorce he'd shacked up with an heiress of the Gamble, the second half of Procter & Gamble, Fortune. He'd planned on marrying her, no doubt to get at her money, and they'd gotten far enough along with that she'd written him into her will. As it all stands, she died. He inherited the money and promptly died himself before he had a chance to amend his will, which set my great-grandmother as his beneficiary, and he ended being good for something. So there you go. A bit late, but this is the story I got over Christmas. This all happened recently. My stepdad's cousin divorced his wife 10+ years ago. He has 1 daughter with his ex. He dated around a bit and finally found someone he liked enough to buy a house with. During the house hunting period, his daughter announces she's pregnant and she's realized she wants a traditional family. So she asks her parents to get back together, meaning her dad would need to bail on his girlfriend, who he was about to purchase a home with. They ducking agreed to it. Her parents said okay. Dad dumped his girlfriend, who is apparently very nice, right before the holidays, and grandma and grandpa to be are now readily available for babysitting duties. It's crazy. I just entered a relationship with the same girl for the third time. First was 30 years ago, then 20 years ago. No contact all for the last 20 years and then she moves in on the same street. Still early but I'll let you know how it turns out. Semicolon. Mutual friend and former co-worker of my husband did this. Military couple go adventuring into the swinger scene. Wife left him for the other wife. She then cheated on her girlfriend with girlfriend's husband and those two run off together. After about 3 years of marriage to second guy, she cheats on him with ex-first husband and they run off together only to be remarried and her blaming the whole fiasco on bipolar disorder. They are still together to this day. Edit. Misspelled word. My girlfriend's parents have divorced twice and are currently married. He cheated on her about 6 times. Terrible relationship. She genuinely loves him and he loves her, but they do not get along at all. They're simply together because she can't be with anyone else. 6. And for their children. My girlfriend's 18 and is planning on moving out soon. We predict that as soon as she does, they'll go their separate ways since she's the last one left at the house. This happened with my parents. They got divorced when I was around 3 years old. In their years apart, they both eventually remarried other people. My mother ended up marrying a polygamist, unbeknownst to her, who drained all of her savings. She left this guy after finding out the above information. My dad married a raging itch who would occasionally get physically abusive towards him. He can be an arsehole but was hesitant to leave her. She eventually cheated on him and he finally divorced her after that. After both going through horrible marriages after their first, they realized what they had wasn't that bad by comparison. They ended up remarrying when I was 10 years old. They are divorced again now. They stayed together for 10 years the second go around. Eventually the habits and mentality that ended their first marriage ended the second. My biological parents married and divorced each other twice all before I was 5 years old. They've gone on to marry other PPL. 2 each, but they have been cheating with each other on and off throughout their other marriages. She's got BPD and he's a narcissist. They are a match made in hell and they truly deserve each other. My husband and I did. We got married the first time after knowing each other for 5 months. We were young. Had no idea what we wanted in life. Had no idea what we had. After 5 years, we split up. We were apart for about a year and a half. We both went through a period of growth and self-reflection. And eventually we came back together. We've now been back together for 6 years. Remarried for 3. My father did this with my stepmother. They met in the military, but she left to pursue teaching. He left her after he cheated on her because he said she lacked the motivation to earn real money. He would only be with someone who could provide and assist him with the comfortable life he wanted. So he met someone just like him. Money and power hungry. They bought a house, multiple cars, and had a kid in under 2 years of being together. Ultimately, they butted heads way too much and he left her, but lost his home, full custody of my sister, and most of his things. The only person that was there for him was my former stepmother, so they remarried. As far as I know, they are both very happy with the situation. I've posted this before, but I think it counts here. My great-grandfather was convicted of murder and executed in Kentucky. He had 3 kids at the time. Then my great-grandmother moved to Oklahoma and remarried, and had 2 more kids. My grandfather was one of the first 3 kids. One of my cousins I'm pretty close with grandfather is one of the Oklahoma kids. But a long-standing family legend is that great-grandpappy Jim actually was never executed and got to Oklahoma and remarried his widow. So a few years ago our grandfathers had genetic testing done, and they're full siblings. I'm not sure what company they used, 23andMe or some other. So apparently my great-grandfather did indeed kill a man, escape execution somehow, and remarried his own widow. He lived to be 98. I met him once when I was 2. I feel like OP is a bot with a ton of other bots just copying and pasting for karma. So many bot answers in here. My brother did this. They married in their early 20s and were married for 3 years when she decided they both had some growing to do. Each went on to marry and divorce others. They had not spoken to each other as 25 plus years when they ran into each other at a fundraiser. They will be married again this Sunday. I did this. We got basically eloped at 20-21 and he was military. Got pregnant quickly. Left the military. Joined real life and it was hard. Money was tight. We lived far from family and we both have PTSD from our childhoods. I chased and smothered him and he ran from me. He coped with video games and I didn't cope at all. I had PPD for about 2 years and we just drifted. Lost and angry. At about 4 years marriage we separated and I filed divorce and got a job for the first time in years. We reconciled but by the end of the year it wasn't working and so we finalized the divorce and split. I think what helped us most was that we split custody 50/50 though he paid child support because he made significantly more than me. The split was amicable and we ended up living in the same apartment complex. We became friends and started living separate lives. We discovered that we actually liked each other as people without having the expectations of marriage to bind us. He would walk over and we would just watch a movie or talk about life or how we should parent our son together. Eventually this led to us realizing we missed each other and so we made another go of it. Moved back in together. Still had some growing to do but we did it. We got remarried this year, 3 years post divorce, and are expecting our second child. It's miles better. My first marriage is dead. It was an awful period of time in both our lives where we were immature and angry and had no clue who we were without each other. Now we are a team and I love and understand him more than ever. Basically we found that we could live without the other but decided we didn't want to. It's a commitment of want, not need. My parents, while never officially divorced, have went through it. They knew each other 2 months and my dad was drafted to join the military. He quickly proposed to and married my mom. A year later here I am. And I cannot tell you the amount of times they split apart growing up. The most recent was a few years ago, where divorce papers were filed and ready to go. No one was happy. They lived apart and we would visit between the two. I have 3 younger siblings. I moved out at 18. They got back together and seemed to be managing. Still not happy. Up until this past year, a lot of bad stuff happened. I had an engagement fall through, and honestly it brought us as a family closer together. Dad lost his job of 23 years and his dad, my grandfather, passed away. My mom and dad grew close and actually fell back in love. Now they are both genuinely happy for the first time I've ever seen. I met my husband at 13. We started dating at 14. Married at just shy of 18. He joined the service just before our marriage. We spent 3 years in Germany and had our 2 sons. When he left the service and we came home in the mid-80s, things were hard and we were divorced. We went to the proceeding together and lived together on and off through our 5-year divorce. We were seeing each other at the time but the high cost of childcare sealed it. I stayed home. He worked. He got remarried and had a daughter who is 7 years younger than her brother. We have been remarried for 30 years. We count the first one though, which would be 37 years in 2020. He asked me out and Ilse turns 40 in 2020. My parents did this. They got married in 1987 then divorced a few months later. My mom found out she was pregnant with my brother. They still went through with the divorce and stayed apart. My grandfather was very old school and basically told my dad he was dead to him if he didn't get back together with my mom. Thanks to my bully ass of a grandpa they got back together and had my brother in OSI 88. So also thanks to my bully ass of a grandpa I came along 3 years later. They stayed married 13 years more. She got remarried to a great guy and my dad never remarried. He said 2 marriages to the same woman was more than enough for him. They had a pretty messy and miserable divorce, but are actually the best of friends these days. Worked out I guess.